My name is Peyton Holloway, and I'm 26 years old. The day I realized my father could look me in the eye and still choose to break my heart didn't come with shouting or chaos. It came in silence, a cold, calculated silence that felt louder than any argument I've ever heard. I remember standing in our living room, watching him smile at my brother like he was the future itself, while I felt like I didn't even exist in the same house. My chest tightened because I already knew what was coming before he even said it. And when he finally spoke, it didn't feel like words. It felt like a verdict I didn't deserve. I grew up in a house where love was never equal, even if they pretended it was. My brother, Daniel, was the golden child, the one with ideas, dreams, and endless chances. I was the one who worked quietly, studied hard, and asked for nothing because I learned early that asking only led to disappointment. My father admired Daniel's ambition, even when it was just another risky plan with no stability. But me, I was always practical, which in his language meant unworthy of investment. Still, I convinced myself that maybe one day I would matter enough for him to choose me to. That hope shattered the day Daniel announced he wanted to start his business. I wasn't surprised when my father immediately agreed to fund everything: rent, equipment, even marketing. It was like watching money flow into a dream built on favoritism. But what hurt more was when I gathered the courage to ask for help too. I didn't ask for much, just a small loan to complete my certification course, something that could change my entire future. My voice was steady, but my hands weren't. And the moment I finished speaking, I saw it in my father's face before he even opened his mouth. Refusal, cold and final. "You need to learn to stand on your own," he said, like I hadn't already been doing exactly that my whole life. Daniel didn't even look uncomfortable. He just sat there, scrolling on his phone while my world shrank in real time. I remember the sound of my own breathing getting louder, like my body was trying to escape the moment my mind couldn't handle. And then came the part that changed everything. My grandmother, sitting quietly in the corner, watching every second of it. Her eyes didn't miss a thing, and for the first time that night, I saw anger in her silence. Something about the way she looked at me told me this wasn't over, not even close. My grandmother didn't say anything that night, but her silence followed me like a shadow. After my father dismissed me, I went straight to my room, pretending I was fine, pretending I didn't feel like something inside me had cracked open. But I wasn't fine. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at my hands like they belonged to someone else. Downstairs, I could hear laughter, Daniel celebrating small plans, my father already building a future around him, and I was not part of any of it. That's when I heard footsteps outside my door. Slow, careful, then a knock, soft but certain. It was Grandma. She walked in without waiting for permission, like she had every right to enter my pain. Her face wasn't soft that night, it was sharp with something I had never seen before. Disappointment, yes, but also fury. She sat beside me quietly for a moment, just listening to my silence. Then she finally spoke, and her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through everything. "They've been doing this for too long," she said. I didn't fully understand what she meant, but I felt something shift in the air, like the ground under my life had started to move. The next morning, everything looked normal on the surface. My father left early to check Daniel's business location. Daniel was excited, talking nonstop about investors who didn't even exist yet. I went to my part-time job like nothing had happened, smiling at customers, folding receipts, pretending I wasn't falling apart inside. But I kept thinking about Grandma's words. Too long. Like she had been watching this story unfold long before I ever realized I was losing it. And for the first time, I started to wonder what she knew that I didn't. That evening, when I came home, I found her sitting alone in the kitchen. No TV, no distractions, just her and a folder placed neatly in front of her. She looked up at me and said, "Sit down, Peyton." Something in her tone made my stomach tighten. I obeyed without thinking. She opened the folder slowly, revealing papers I didn't understand at first: bank statements, old property documents, signatures I had never seen before. Then she said something that made my breath stop. "Your father didn't build this family's wealth alone." I felt my heart race, confusion mixing with something heavier fear. She looked at me directly now, her eyes steady and unshaking. "And he's not the only one who gets to decide where it goes." She closed the folder and slid it closer to me, like she was placing a key in my hands. I didn't know it yet, but that moment was the beginning of something I could never undo. And somewhere deep inside me, the pain I had been carrying started turning into something else. Not anger yet, something colder, something waking up. That night, I couldn't sleep. The house was too quiet, but my mind was too loud. Grandma's folder sat on my desk like it was alive, like it was watching me. Every few minutes, I open it, stare at the papers, then close it again because none of it fully made sense yet. But one thing was clear: my father's version of reality wasn't the full story. And somehow, Grandma had been holding pieces of it for years. I felt like I was standing at the edge of something huge, something that could either save me or destroy everything I knew. The next morning, Grandma called me into her room again. This time, she didn't hesitate. She told me things I had never heard before about investments made before I was born, about property my father managed but didn't fully own, about money that had been quietly moved and controlled over time. Her voice stayed calm, but every sentence felt heavier than the last. Then she said the words that changed everything. "He only controls what I allowed him to control." I froze, because I finally understood this wasn't just family drama. It was power, and I had been on the losing side my entire life without even knowing it. Meanwhile, Daniel's business had started gaining attention, or at least that's what he claimed. My father was proud, almost blindly so, constantly talking about expansion and future success. But I started noticing cracks, calls Daniel avoided, documents he never showed, meetings that never seemed real. I kept quiet, but I was watching everything differently now. Even my father looked different to me, not as a leader, but as someone clinging to a story he desperately wanted to believe. And I was starting to realize belief doesn't always equal truth. One evening, I overheard a conversation I wasn't supposed to hear. Daniel was arguing with someone on the phone, his voice sharp, panicked. "Just give me more time," he said. "My dad is handling it." But there was no confidence in his tone, only desperation. I stepped back before he could see me, my heart pounding. That was the first time I realized something might be wrong with everything he had built or claimed to build. And the worst part, my father had no idea, or maybe he did, and he just didn't want to see it. Later that night, I told Grandma everything I had heard. She didn't look surprised. That scared me more than anything. She simply nodded, like pieces were finally aligning in her mind. Then she said, "There will come a moment when the truth won't be hidden anymore." She paused, then added quietly, "And when that moment comes, you will have to decide who you are." I didn't sleep again that night, because deep down, I could feel it too. Something was building, something was coming, and I was no longer just the one left behind. The turning point came faster than I expected. Daniel's business was finally launching in front of guests, investors, and my father's closest friends. The house was full of noise, laughter, and fake celebration. My father stood at the center of it all, proudly introducing Daniel like he had already changed the world. I stood at the edge of the room, invisible again. But this time it didn't hurt the same way, because I knew something they didn't. Grandma was there too, calm and composed, watching every face like she was counting seconds until a storm. And I could feel it building. Daniel gave his speech like an actor on stage. Confident words, fake promises, big dreams that sounded impressive to people who didn't look closely. My father clapped like it was the greatest moment of his life. But then something shifted. Grandma stood up slowly. The room didn't go silent immediately, but it felt like the air changed. She walked toward the center, holding a small envelope in her hand. My father noticed her and smiled, but it was nervous, unsure. "Mom, "What are you doing?" he asked, and she simply said, ending a story that should have never been built on lies. She opened the envelope. Inside were printed documents, transaction records, and signatures. Her voice was steady as she began to speak. She explained how money had been moved, how ownership was misrepresented, how Daniel's business was not what it seemed. At first, people laughed nervously, thinking it was a misunderstanding. But then she called out names, dates, numbers, details too precise to ignore. The laughter died slowly. One by one, faces changed. Confusion turned into shock. My father's smile faded completely. Daniel looked like the ground had disappeared under him. Then came the moment that broke everything open. Grandma turned slightly and said, "And the real funding behind all of this was never his father's success, it was family assets he misused," assuming no one would question him. The room erupted in whispers. My father stepped forward, trying to interrupt, trying to control the narrative. But no one was listening anymore. Investors were already checking their phones, messages flying, confirmations collapsing in real time. Daniel's voice cracked when he tried to explain, but nothing he said made sense anymore. Everything he built was unraveling in front of everyone. And then Grandma looked at me. For the first time that night, her expression softened. She said Peyton didn't get what she was promised, because it was already taken from her in silence. My chest tightened. Every eye in the room slowly turned toward me. My father looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time and realizing he had been wrong for years. I didn't speak. I didn't need to, because the truth was already standing in front of everyone, and there was no way to push it back into the dark. The room stayed frozen for what felt like an eternity. No one spoke. No one moved, as if even breathing could make the truth more real than they could handle. My father finally broke the silence, his voice low, shaking, trying to regain control that was already gone. "This is a misunderstanding," he said, but it sounded weak, even to him. Daniel stood there pale, staring at the floor like it might swallow him whole, and me. I just stood quietly, feeling something I had never felt in that house before. Power. Not loud, not cruel, just truth finally standing on my side. Grandma didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She simply placed another document on the table, this time with a finality that felt like a door closing forever. "Everything I built will now be managed fairly," she said calmly. "Not through favoritism, not through illusion." My father tried to argue again, but the words wouldn't come out the same way anymore. The guests were no longer watching with curiosity, they were watching with judgment. And for the first time in my life, I saw my father lose something he thought he could never lose: authority. Then Grandma turned to Daniel. Her expression wasn't hateful, just disappointed in a way that hurt more than anger. "You were given opportunity," she said softly, "but you confused it with entitlement." Daniel didn't respond. He couldn't. His entire identity, the business, the pride, the admiration had collapsed in front of everyone. I didn't feel joy watching him break. I felt something quieter, closure, because I had spent years being compared, ignored, and dismissed. And now the truth had finally balanced the weight of it all. My father looked at me again, this time differently, not as someone invisible, but as someone he could no longer overlook. "Peyton," he said, but I interrupted him for the first time in my life. My voice was calm, steady. "You didn't lose me today," I said. "You lost me a long time ago. Today, you just finally saw it." The words didn't come from anger. They came from exhaustion, from years of silence finally speaking back. And in that moment, I didn't need his approval anymore. I had already stepped out of his shadow. When everyone finally left, the house felt empty in a new way. Not lonely, just honest. Grandma came and stood beside me on the balcony later that night. The air was quiet, the city lights distant. She said, "You didn't fight for revenge. You fought for truth." I looked at her, feeling something warm rise in my chest for the first time in years. I had lost a family that never truly saw me, but I gained something else instead: myself. And as I stood there, I finally understood that justice doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it arrives quietly, through truth that was waiting all along.